Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Daryl Grove, but I am not joined by Taylor Rockwell today. Taylor will be back with me on Wednesday to talk about the Pachuca v Dallas CONCACAF Champions League semi-final. The DVR is set. In his absence, I have a truly excellent guest for you. On today's show, I'll be talking to Matt Hermann of the Talking Fussball podcast. As you might guess from the name, Talking Fussball is an English-language Bundesliga podcast that rounds up all the action every week, and I highly recommend you subscribe. I took this opportunity to ask Matt about all things Bundesliga, so we talk about Christian Pulisic's profile among German fans, where John Brooks might be headed next, can anyone ever challenge Bayern Munich, and what's the deal with Schalke? All that and plenty more on today's show. Before you listen, I want to remind you can support TSS and look good at the same time with a Total Soccer Show scarf or t-shirt. Visit totalsoccershow.com/shop to take a look. The link is in the show notes. Okay, let's talk some Bundesliga. So I'm joined by Matt Hermann of the Talking Fussball podcast. Matt, thank you for coming on the Total Soccer Show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've wanted to come on this show for a long time. I like your show quite a lot.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will take all kinds of compliments that we can get here. The reason I really wanted to get you on is because I feel like we've only looked at the Bundesliga, Taylor and I, through a very sort of US men's national team centric lens. And I know that you're correct me if I'm wrong here, you're an American, but you're living in London, but you're working for a German news outlet. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah, you do have the basic contours, right? I'm even a native Virginian there.
Oh, how about that?
Not even American, just from Virginia. Although it's Northern Virginia, so it's sort of a different place. I ended up in Germany through a journalist exchange program and got into doing reporting on the Bundesliga, working for Deutsche Welle, which is Germany's international broadcaster. Did a lot of radio, did a fair bit of online stuff. Now do a lot of TV. And for personal reasons, because my wife is a university lecturer in London, I have moved to London. I spend most of my time here. But I still go back to Germany a whole lot and keep on working for DW, keep on focusing on the Bundesliga with Talking Fussball. I'm obsessed, you could say.
Okay, so I've got loads of questions I want to ask you, and I essentially want to tap into the knowledge that you have that Taylor and I don't have, if that makes sense. First thing I want to go for is those US men's national team players. I want to ask about sort of what the perception is in Germany, in sort of German media. So, for example, we're all obviously like super maybe overexcited about Christian Pulisic. Is he talked about in Germany?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, he had that brief spell with the first team in the second half of the season last year, and he was sort of on the radar of your more committed football fans, at least from that point in time. And even at the beginning of this season, when there was a little bit of talk about whether he might be attracted to a move to England, which I never really gave a lot of credence to just because he was only starting his Dortmund career, people were talking about him mostly in the context of he's just another one of those brilliant kids that Dortmund has. But over the course of the season, that's kind of changed. I mean, especially in that Marco Reus has had another season that's been sort of up and down with injury, especially because Mario Götze, his return to Dortmund hasn't gone at all as planned. And both of those guys play in similar positions to Pulisic. And it wasn't clear at first if Pulisic would be able to fill the shoes of those guys or sort of separate himself from all the other youngsters at Dortmund. And really, in the last couple of months, he has, especially since that Benfica win. I mean, he set up the equalizer. He scored the winner in about as cool a fashion as you could. And the kid is, 18 years old. Yeah. So there's not a lot of guys, German, American, Turkish, French, whoever, that make that kind of an impact at a club like Dortmund. And when you do that, Mehmet Scholl starts saying, let's buy him up, Bayern. Lothar Matthäus has been talking him up. He's definitely a guy that fans all over the Bundesliga see as one of the young guys for the future in the whole league.
You also mentioned Mario Götze there. Do you have any update on sort of what's the latest with his, I don't want to say injury, it's more of illness, I suppose, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, both he and the club have been pretty tight-lipped about what is going on. I mean, the only update that we have had is that it's unlikely that he'll be participating in any competitive sporting activities until August at the earliest. So it sounds like for much further diagnosis and treatment need to happen before, he can really do much of anything to further his career. I mean, at this point, it seems like looking at his career moving forward is a very, very big question mark. I mean, whether he will ever get back to anything like the top levels we saw from him is a big question.
I want to talk about John Brooks as well, because obviously every time we see him for the US, we get very excited because we see him as sort of a dominant centre-back, but also a ball-playing centre-back. I know he's at Hertha Berlin. I know he's been putting in good performances from what I've seen. Are these the sort of performances that are attracting the attention of bigger teams, or is John Brooks sort of just settled at Hertha and staying there?
It's definitely attracting the interest of bigger teams. And, I always love to talk about John Brooks. John Brooks is, he's my man. He plays for Hertha, which is my team. He plays for the U.S., which is my team. So anytime I get to talk about John Brooks, it's a good thing. It does seem to me that he is likely to stay at Hertha for maybe one more year. His contract runs through 2019. So next summer might be really the prime time to sell him, and perhaps they're banking on him having a big World Cup in Russia with the U.S. Fingers crossed. But still, I could also see, if a club the caliber of, a sort of top 6 Premier League club or Bayern Dortmund put big money on the barrel for him, 20 million or something like that, I think that they would probably take the money and be very happy with it. I mean, I would love to see him stay at Hertha for another year or even 2, just from a development aspect, because, he is clearly their best defender at the moment. I mean, Niklas Stark and Mitchell Weiser, if you want to call them defenders, they both have, midfield aspirations in a way, are also very, very good. But Brooks is a gem of a central defender, and he basically gets to play every game he's healthy. So for his own development for the United States, it's a great place for him to be.
So do you think he could fit in at, say, a Dortmund or Bayern? Which it sounds, from what you said, it sounds like that's the only sort of step up, if that makes sense. Like a move, maybe you're the wrong person to ask now that I know you're a Hertha fan, because it means you might be biased, but would a move to like a Leverkusen or someone be too much of a sideways move?
Well, I mean, Leverkusen and Schalke have taken looks at him in the past. That's, I think Schalke even made a concrete offer for him last winter transfer window, but they just didn't offer enough money either for Hertha to be that interested. And, Schalke is a bigger club than Hertha for sure. They pay a lot bigger wages. That's also for sure. But from a sort of, like exposure aspect or European competition aspect, it's only a little step up compared to the very big step up that you would get from going to a perennial Champions League club. So I think at this point he's too big to take that sort of a step. He would need to make a bigger step in order for it to make sense.
So this also brings up a question that I've always wanted to ask. What's the deal with Schalke? Schalke seem to me like a big team, and yet they never seem to quite be like challenging for titles or doing anything, especially recently, sort of anything that would match the size of the club. Have I got a correct read on that?
You totally do. I mean, Schalke are, by some measures, at least by the number of members of the club, as well as sort of nationwide fans. I mean, they're one of the biggest, if not the biggest club in Germany. I mean, they have more members than Bayern. They have a lot of people across the country. I mean, you find Schalke fans in Brandenburg, in Baden-Württemberg, in Bavaria. I mean, it's one of the few true nationally supported clubs in Germany, which is amazing considering how little concrete success they have. It's really a cult club in that people from that particular area, Gelsenkirchen, which is a really ghastly town, I have to say, are truly committed to the club, and there's an amazing sort of family aspect to the club. However, that's sometimes a dysfunctional family in that there's a lot of decision makers at that club making rather impulsive decisions or trying to sort of position themselves to the press in the most favorable light, and there's always sort of competing loyalties going on at Schalke. It's a crazy club. It's probably the one that national sports journalists enjoy the most. Although this season's been a little quieter than many because they finally have a coach and a sporting director who are a little bit less flying off the handle prone. But it's definitely the kind of club that if they had the right people in place, it's the kind of club you could win the Champions League with, in terms of resources, in terms of consistent support. But they have come nowhere near putting all of that together. I mean, they've challenged for the title legitimately maybe twice in the last 20 years, in 2001 and then again in 2007. I mean, they came within a game or two of winning the title, or in 2001 they came within a few minutes of winning a title.
Oh, but, I remember that. Was it Schalke who thought they'd won it, and they were kind of celebrating?
Yes.
Yeah.
They had won it, but it turned out that Bayern scored a very, very late indirect free kick against Hamburg to get them the points that they needed to pass Schalke up in the table after Schalke had started celebrating. So kind of a sad story for the Royal Blues.
The other reason I was asking about Schalke is they have, I think, 3 young Americans sort of making their way through the ranks. I know Weston McKennie played in, and I think Nick Tattagou played in like one of the friendlies. And I'm wondering if maybe, because isn't there a Dortmund-Schalke rivalry? And I'm wondering if sort of US fans are going to have to choose like Pulisic and Dortmund and McKennie and Schalke, and we might have that whole rivalry come over here.
Oh, I think that would be a really great development, not only for Schalke, but for the league. I mean, as well as anybody, as a longtime watcher of all kinds of European and American football on TV in the U.S., like the landscape is so dominated by the Premier League, and to a lesser extent MLS, which I think is quite justified being it's the domestic league. But the Bundesliga is such a second fiddle, third fiddle, fourth fiddle, especially during the goal TV years, the wilderness. And, there's only so much Dortmund, Bayern / Pulisic, Wood, Brooks, whatever hype that can take a league over the line. And any further storyline, especially a further storyline that involves good teams, that involves big teams with big traditions, that involves good young Americans, that would be huge. I mean, Schalke is a club that, I'm not a fan of the club, but I'm a fan of the sort of culture of the club. I think it's a really amazing club. When you go there, they've kind of built this like little mini Schalke town on the edge of Gelsenkirchen, where there's the stadium, which is a beautiful, beautiful stadium that's only about 10, 15 years old, that they built for the World Cup next to the old stadium. They have a hotel, they have a hospital, they have various, clubhouses for members of the community to come and enjoy Schalke. They have a training facility. Like the kids who live there, basically, they don't really ever have to leave little Schalke town because Schalke has built this, little football paradise. And it's an amazing thing to see in what is very much a poor city that doesn't have a lot of sort of social infrastructure for people. I mean, it's the best thing in that town by a long way.
So it's got everything but the trophies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of, I'm looking at the title race this year, and it looks to me like Bayern Munich are going to win it again. And it also looks to me, I was looking at sort of historical wins. I know Bayern Munich have historically dominated, but this year would be, 5 in a row? And I'm wondering if there's any concern in the Bundesliga that this is getting to be too much. Like I can't see anybody challenging them. Like not just this year, but in the future. And I wondered if you had a different read on that, or what people's reaction is to that.
It's funny. I thought I might have a different read on that at the beginning of the season when, it looked like Bayern didn't have Carlo Ancelotti's game plan quite figured out, or perhaps Ancelotti did not have a game plan figured out as to what his best side was, et cetera, et cetera. But the way they've come on after, say, the first, 12, 15 games of the season, when they really sort of strapped things on and have been markedly better than anyone else in the league, I would have to agree. I mean, this year's title race has turned into a farce, unfortunately, which, I had kind of forgotten what a fun thing it is to have a title race in the Bundesliga, because, if you remember, before Bayern won their, 4, and now it's going to be 5 in a row, the title race in the Bundesliga was often kind of up in the air, at least who was going to be in it from year to year. Dortmund won their back-to-back titles. They had one of those titles was also quite a large margin of victory. But in the years prior to that, you had seen Wolfsburg win the league. You'd seen Stuttgart win the league. Within the decade before that, you'd seen Bremen win the league. It was a fairly unpredictable league in that only about every other year, on average, was Bayern the dominant side or even the winning side.
Yeah.
And this period now, with Bayern sort of wiping the floor with the rest of the league, is a new development in the Bundesliga. It's, I think, a lot to do with the sort of hyper-professionalization of sports management and coaching and, recruitment, which has happened largely among, Real, Barca, and Bayern Munich, who have sort of separated themselves from the rest of Europe. They are the true, super clubs of the world.
Yeah.
And they basically, when you play them in the Champions League, all you can do is shudder or hope that you're Atletico Madrid on a good day. And the rest of the Bundesliga just don't have any kind of antidote for that. I mean, Dortmund, at least from the aspect of how much revenue they have or the sort of global footprint that they have among fans, social media or anything like that, they are the only club that really have any hope of standing up to Bayern in the short term.
What about Leipzig with all their energy drink money? And they're in second place right now. Is there any chance that they become sort of the competitor?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I mean, like you say, they are currently ahead of Dortmund in the standings, and Christ, I mean, Hoffenheim are ahead of Dortmund in the standings by a hair. But I don't see them as having earned those stripes just yet. I mean, if Leipzig can get in the Champions League, which I'm almost positive they will this year, if they can do that the year after that and the year after that, and get some more money from Red Bull, I think that they could have a very, very interesting influence on German football. I mean, not entirely positive, of course, but they could really have a lot to say about the direction of the Bundesliga going forward, because there's a lot of traditional clubs in the league who view them as not only interlopers, but very dangerous interlopers, the way that they are gaining their success. And there will be a lot of good football played because of that, because there's going to be a lot more, effort put in by certain clubs, as well as, we've seen Leipzig. They're an attractive team to watch, but there will be some losses as well.
Is it so? I assume the distaste for Leipzig is about the sort of the way they did a run around of the 50+1 rule, and it seems like that's what's annoyed other teams and other fans. But is there a way where that's the direction that teams may need to go in order to challenge Bayern? Yeah,
it's very hard because, the 50+1 rule is really good in terms of its sort of promotion of engagement with the community. I mean, basically all it amounts to is that clubs have to give 50% plus one vote of their controlling interest over to the fans who are members of the club, rather than sponsors or investors in a club who in other management models would have controlling interests. And then the way Leipzig and Hoffenheim and other clubs have gotten around that has been to limit the number of members of the club to sometimes ridiculously low number of members, like 3 or 16 or what have you, and just make the membership fee very, very high. I would find that a pretty unfortunate compromise to make. I would say that there will be at some stage in the near future, probably in the next 5 to 10 years, some sort of reform of the 50+1 rule. I would not be surprised if some real serious attention is paid to maintaining certain standards of community engagement and or community or club members' control. But I do think that, the global boom in football, when it comes to television revenues, when it comes to investment from China and to a lesser extent the United States, there's just too much money on the table for the Bundesliga to leave it there. I mean, especially the Bundesliga as a league entity has really turned its attention toward China and toward catering their product to that market. And there's a lot of investors who want to put money into the Bundesliga who perhaps are reluctant to do so because they will be, putting tens of millions of euros into an investment that they have very little control over. And it's going to be a real fight in the coming years when you have clubs. I mean, look at the likes of Stuttgart, who are down in the second division now, or clubs like Eintracht or Cologne or Hertha, who have spent time in the second division. I mean, these are big traditional clubs that have a lot of fans, and their fans don't like seeing Hoffenheim or seeing Leipzig or seeing right. even the likes of Mainz in the first division when they say, "Come on, we've got 40, 50,000 fans who come every week. We turn on the TVs and we build up the ratings. Nobody wants to watch Leverkusen on TV. Why shouldn't the league be about us?
It feels to me like we're sort of at a weird tipping point where the Bundesliga from the outside looks like the model, right? Lots of youth development. It's a place where someone like Pulisic could come through, but also lots of German players too. I keep reading about the affordable tickets where it's like €25 to go and watch a top-level game. But then at the same time, I see from the outside, I see the Bundesliga wanting to commercialise and promote itself more internationally. Like you said, the focus on China. So it seems like there's going to be a push and a pull in two different directions.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Bundesliga have not gone nearly as far as the Premier League have, of course, when it comes to promoting itself internationally or going on international tours. I mean, for example, Bayern Munich, that was the first time this past summer that a Bundesliga side had been invited to and had participated in that farcical tournament of champions or whatever they call it in the summer,
US,
which is
it's
the
International Champions Cup, I believe.
Yes, there you go, the International Champions Cup. And I went to one of those games. I went to the one in Charlotte, and it was a good time. It was fun. I got to see Julian Green take over a match, which is not something I see every day. But those kinds of initiatives are things that most Bundesliga clubs have shied away from, not only from the aspect that they don't want to get distracted from their preparations, but also they just, for a long time, and I think this has something to do with a general German cultural reticence around self-promotion.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say that this is a modest people or anything like that, because I think anyone who knows Germany well knows that it's a country that's very confident in itself. But it doesn't necessarily look to outside approval in that way.
That's part of the confidence, right? Is that you don't need the approval from the outside. Yeah,
exactly. And they're very satisfied with themselves and with what they have going. They like this model that they have come up with, which is basically serving their traditional fan bases. And they don't want to lose sight of the fact that basically the Bundesliga is for us and not for the sort of casual fan in Korea or in Mexico or what have you. I mean, there's a lot of grumbling around the Bundesliga about how much they tried to capitalize on the promotion of Chicharito, for example, in his first year of Leverkusen. And people found that crass. I mean, it also gained them a whole lot of new fans in Mexico and in the United States, and it was ultimately a very successful thing for them to do. But it did not leave a good taste in some people's mouths.
I want to ask you some quick-fire questions here, Matt, because I know we've got to get you out of here in about 10 minutes or so. First quick-fire question, what's the biggest surprise success of the season in the Bundesliga this year?
Could
be any team, any player, any coach, anything you want to pick.
You know, I'm actually going to pick I might have picked Leipzig just because they're in second place, but everybody knew they were going to be pretty good anyway. I will actually pick Cologne and Frankfurt. These are two clubs which I mentioned earlier have not really played up to their potential for the last 10 or 20 years. And this season, they've pretty much been up and around the European places the whole way. And they both are threatening to sort of fall off that pace at the moment. But seeing two big clubs, big traditional clubs who haven't been good like that in about 20, 30 years, it's really been a nice thing to see.
Speaking of Frankfurt, that's Timmy Chandler's team, is that correct?
Indeed, yeah.
So I've been reading that he lost his spot at right back and has been sort of moving around the field. Is that correct?
No, I mean, I'm not ready to say that exactly. I mean, I think for him, he's already proved his worth in terms of what he can bring to a healthy Frankfurt side. I mean, Frankfurt have had lots of injuries at the back and have needed to move a lot of people around to a lot of different places. I mean, they basically lost their entire first string central defense and have had to play him at times in a three-man back line or play him in midfield if they had somebody else more appropriate to put there. So he's getting his playing time. I think that it's just been that there's been so much upheaval in that team that they've sort of needed him in more places. Okay,
so we won't worry about Timmy Chandler then. All is good. So what's been the biggest disappointment this season? Again, either a coach, a team, a player, sort of anyone that hasn't done as well as expected.
Oh, Leverkusen and Roger Schmidt, who got himself fired
Yeah.
a few weeks back. I mean, you look at that squad, and there are so many extremely good players, and there are players who are either young up and comers who are attracting interest from bigger clubs, internationals in good sides. I mean, you have Chicharito, Kevin Campbell, Omer Toprak, Julian Brandt, Jonathan Tah, Benjamin Henrichs, Kai Havertz. I mean, a lot of players that a lot of other Bundesliga sides and sides elsewhere would love to have, and it just didn't come together. I mean, I think that in a way it was just Roger Schmidt's style was just so taxing on players, both physically and mentally.
Right.
And after a couple of years of that, I think some of the players just weren't ready to go along with it. Oh, how did I not mention Karim Bellarabi or the much missed Hakan Çalhanoğlu as well? It's doing my head in. But Roger Schmidt, his style apparently was kind of getting on the players' tits a little bit, maybe, and the experiment failed at a certain point in the season. I think the management there thought that he might be able to turn it around, and when he couldn't, especially after that hammering at Dortmund, they just didn't have a plan B. And they've hired this guy who's a sort of not very good retread, Tayfun Korkut. And it's a sad, sad thing because I think they've shown in the Champions League that they have a lot to offer. They just haven't been able to do it in the league, and they're treading water in mid-table, which is sad.
All right, my final but one question. Are there any sort of, we do the TSS scouting network where we like to keep an eye on sort of the good young players. So, we're already aware of, say, Kai Havertz, a guy like that. But are there any young players or like under the radar players that people outside of the Bundesliga maybe don't know about or aren't paying enough attention to?
Well, it's hard because I try to pay attention to a lot of these players, and I'm not often in those particular shoes. But I don't know if Leipzig's success has shown enough of a light on Willi Orban. He's their central defender, who sort of has been the middle of their defense and has sort of held it down for them all season. He's a big dude, and he's also fairly quick. He's got a good positional sense. He's really the complete package. I think at some point he's going to be a big player for both Germany and a much bigger club one day. I think he's a really exciting young player. I mean, the two others that I might say are not so young, but they're kind of late bloomers, and they might be ones that people are already familiar with, maybe not. Kerem Demirbay for Hoffenheim and Vincenzo Grifo for Freiburg. I mean, they're both, I think, 24 at this point, and are not ending up at the places where they came up. Demirbay was a Schalke and Dortmund. He's a Ruhrpott kid who sort of had to kick around to a lot of different clubs before catching on. Vincenzo Grifo came up at Hoffenheim and had to move a few different places before he sort of found his feet. But they're both very, very good. I mean, they have played a big hand in both of those teams' success, and they are producing big numbers as well. I mean, Vincenzo Grifo has 5 goals and 11 assists. He's a really dangerous player, and I'm very sad that it looks like Mönchengladbach are going to beat Hertha to his signature next season.
Would you mind repeating the Leipzig defender's name? Because I know we'll have people probably skipping backwards to try and recatch it.
Sure. Willi Orban, Orban.
Thank you. That will save some people from Googling.
Yeah, no problem.
Final guy I haven't asked about is Bobby Wood. We were all really excited about Bobby Wood. He seemed to be scoring a few goals for Hamburg, lifted them like slowly but surely up the table. And I wonder if his profile is big in the Bundesliga in terms of other teams taking a look at him. And I also wonder if you had any information on his back injury, which seemed to keep him out of the 2 World Cup qualifiers, but then he was straight back in the Hamburg team this weekend. And that made me sort of scratch my chin a little bit and wonder if something was going on.
No, I think that was purely bad timing.
Okay.
Because he was brought off very late in that Frankfurt match, which was just before the break, and it looked like he was legitimately feeling some kind of pain. But then again, he played brilliantly this weekend, and it was a good indication of what he is capable of. I mean, despite the fact that he did score a goal on his debut and scored again in his second match at Hamburg, I would actually say it took him a while to settle in there. Yeah. He went through a long dry spell. He lost his place to Michal Grgoric for a while, and I think it was just he's as we all know, he's not a real technical player. He's a bit of a battering ram, and it seemed like that style wasn't really meshing with his teammates at first, or they didn't know where to look for him or him for them.
Yeah.
And that's completely changed over the last couple of months. I mean, since he's gotten his place back as the starting, number 9, his physicality is both helping him score goals and setting up other players as well. I mean, he got that winner against Gladbach a few weeks back, which was basically his coming out party. He was dominant in that match, and it really made the rest of the Bundesliga take notice. He also happened to change his agent the same weekend, which some people read as a bit of a come and get me signal, because, of course, Hamburg have been flirting with relegation all season, and there is a rumor around that he has a 12 million euro buyout clause if Hamburg stay up and only a 5 million one if they go down. So maybe he was paving the way for a move. But, he's looking great at the moment. He set up Nikolai Müller for the opener against Cologne this past weekend. He would have set up Lewis Holtby for a winner, but the goal was disallowed. He's very much the focal point for Hamburg at the moment.
I guess I should complete the set and ask about Fabian Johnson. Otherwise, I'll be hearing about it on Twitter. I guess Fabian Johnson, every time I see him for Mönchengladbach, I think looks really impressive. And I wonder if there's any chance of him sort of moving up in the world, or is he roughly at about the right level in terms of Bundesliga teams?
I think he's in exactly the right place. I think it's going to be disappointing for him if Gladbach miss out on European football next year, which looks like a very, very likely likely eventuality.
Yeah.
But I think that this is still a team around which he can grow as a player. I mean, they have a lot of good players. They are perhaps going to bolster their squad with the likes of Vincenzo Grifo, with the likes of perhaps Nadim Amiri is another interesting player who they have some interest in. They have some interest in buying off of Hoffenheim. I mean, that would, of course, make the competition for places in attacking midfield, a little bit tougher. But I think that Fabian Johnson is at a real good place for himself. Much like John Brooks at Hertha, he's not necessarily guaranteed to play whenever he's healthy, but he plays most of the time. And when he does play, he plays well. So I wouldn't see a move in his future unless the long and somewhat ridiculously rumored Barcelona interest resurfaces.
All right, Matt, on that note, I will say thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, nice one. It was lovely.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. Once again, that was Matt Hermann of the Talking Fussball podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, I highly recommend you subscribe to the Talking Fussball podcast. Link will be in the show notes. The other link you'll find in the show notes is totalsoccershow.com/shop, where you can buy a TSS scarf or t-shirt. And I'll close with a final reminder that on tomorrow's show, Taylor and I will be reviewing FC Dallas's visit to Pachuca. If you're listening before the game, Dallas go to Pachuca with a 2-1 lead in the CONCACAF Champions League semi-final from the first leg. It's all to play for, and you can watch the game Tuesday night, 10 o'clock Eastern on Univision Deportes or on Facebook Live. Until then, thank you for taking the time to listen to the Total Soccer Show, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.